Hey y'all, and welcome back to me reading Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. We're plugging away at this book. Some really pretty imagery in this last chapter, um, where the little irritations sometimes introduced by Aunt Norris were short, were trifling, and were as a drop of water to the ocean. I think she's a little more irritating than that, but good for her. Good for Fanny to have that perspective. What a delight. This book is slowly becoming quite the delight. And we finished last chapter with a Yelp review from Fanny of On the Two Houses so far. She said, in a review of the two houses, as they appeared to her before the end of the week, Fanny was tempted to apply them to Dr. Johnson's celebrated judgment as to matrimony and celibacy, and say that though Mansfield Park might have some pains, Portsmouth could have no pleasures. So she was recently sent home by Lord Bertram to kind of make her feel like, hey, you should be grateful for what you have. And hopefully, when you get to your mother's house, you will absolutely value all the money that Henry Crawford could possibly give and make you miss us and Henry Crawford and be a little more grateful. And we all kind of thought, me being me in my head, thought she's gonna go home and just be stoked. But I was like, there's gonna be a lot of people there. There's gonna be a lot of people there. We'll see. She's either gonna be super endearing, like, oh, this is my crazy family. Like, I remember all these people and like want to dig into the trenches, but I did not anticipate her absolutely. I mean, she wrote a scathing review of her parents. Mrs. Price is more like Lady Bertram, where she's kind of half asleep all the time. And it's like wrangling around people hallooing. Lots of hallooing at the Price house. And I think she is seeing the value. I think she is seeing the value in the silence that she absolutely needs. It sounds like she really needs quiet. So we are in chapter XL, which is chapter 40. And we're going to see, I mean, I can't possibly even guess now. Jane Austen's such a good writer. I'm finding that Jane Austen is actually such a good writer. There's only so much that somebody can tell you. Like, Jane Austen's really good. She's like once in a life. She's like brilliant. And you're like, okay. But now that I'm reading it, I agree. Chapter 40. Fanny was right enough in not expecting to hear from Miss Crawford now at the rapid rate in which their correspondence had begun. So Fanny did predict that now that she's at home with Mrs. Price and not in the presence of Edmund, Mary Crawford is not writing as much. That's interesting. Mary's next letter was after a decidedly longer interval than the last, but she was not right in supposing that such an interval would be felt a great relief to herself. Here was another strange revolution of mind. She was really glad to receive the letter when it did come. And before she was waiting for some horror of evil that is Mary Crawford's letters. Lots of evil in this book. But now we're learning that not everything is good and bad. I think before she was seeing, my mind is just being blown. Before she was seeing things in black and white, and now she's like, okay, there's nuance. That was hard to figure out at that age. What is she, 19? Things aren't black and white. My parents aren't incredible. I am learning that they are human. And also these people that I thought were really bad are actually, now that I'm back home, I'm actually excited to hear from them. Wow. It's a coming of age tale. It was another straight, right? And I love a revolution of mind. It is like another strange revolution of mind. That's great. In her present exile from good society and distance from everything it had been wont to interest her. A letter from one belonging to the set where her heart lived, written with affection and some degree of elegance, was thoroughly acceptable. The usual plea of increasing engagements was made an excuse for not having written to her earlier. And now that I have begun, she continued, my letter will not be worth your reading, for there will be no little offering of love at the end, no 3 or 4 lines passionnées from the most devoted H.C. in the world, for Henry is in Norfolk. Business called him to Everingham 10 days ago, or perhaps he only pretended to call for the sake of being travelling at the same time that you were, but there he is, and by his absence may sufficiently account for any remissness of his sisters in writing, for there has been no... Well, Mary, when do you write to Fanny? Is not it time for you to write to Fanny, to spur on me? At last, after various attempts at meeting, I have seen your cousins, dear Julia and dearest Mrs. Rushworth. They have found me at home yesterday, and we were glad to see each other again. We seemed very glad to see each other, and I do really think we were a little. We had a vast deal to say. Shall I tell you how Mrs. Rushworth looked when your name was mentioned? I did not used to think her wanting in self-possession, but she had not quite enough for the demands of yesterday. Upon the whole, Julia was in the best looks of the two, at least after you were spoken of. There was no recovering the complexion from the moment that I spoke of Fanny, and spoke of her as a sister should. But Mrs. Rushworth's day of good looks will come. We have cards for her first party on the 28th. Then she will be in beauty, for she will open one of the best houses in Wimpole Street. I was in it 2 years ago, when it was Lady Lascelles, and prefer it to almost any I know in London, and certainly she will then feel, to use a vulgar phrase, that she has got her pennyworth for her penny. Henry could have not afforded her such a house. I hope she will recollect it, and be satisfied, as well as she may, with moving the queen of a palace, though the king may appear best in the background. And as I have no desire to tease her, I shall never force your name upon her again. She will grow sober by degrees. From all that I hear and guess, Baron Wildenheim's attentions to Julia continue, but I do not know that he has any serious encouragement. She ought to do better. A poor honourable is no catch. Oh, and I cannot imagine any liking in the case, for take away his rants, and the poor Baron has nothing. What a difference a vowel makes. What a difference a vowel makes is absolutely right. Underline that. If his rents were but equal to his rants. He loves a good rant. You know what? Me too, actually. I love an impassioned rant. Your cousin, I think that's what they're talking about. Your cousin Edmund moves slowly, detained perchance by parish duties. There may be some old woman at Thornton Lacey to be converted. I am unwilling to fancy myself neglected for a young one. Adieu, my dear sweet Fanny. This is a long letter from London. Write me a pretty one in reply, to gladden Henry's eyes, when he comes back, and send me an account of all the dashing young captains whom you disdain for his sake. There was great food for meditation in this letter. Food for meditation? Jane! Who are you? There was great food for meditation in this letter. And chiefly for unpleasant meditation. I had an unpleasant meditation today. And yet with all the uneasiness it supplied, it connected her with the absent. It told her of people and things about whom she had never felt so much curiosity as now. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, huh? And now she had... What? And she would have been glad to have been sure... Why do those words together look so crazy? Okay, sorry. There was great food for meditation in this letter, and chiefly for unpleasant meditation, and yet, with all the uneasiness it supplied, it connected her with the absent. It told her of people and things about whom she never felt so much curiosity as now, and she would have been glad to have been sure of such a letter every week. Her correspondence with her Aunt Bertram was her only concern of higher interest. As for any society in Portsmouth that could at all make amends for deficiencies at home, there were none within the circle of her father's and mother's acquaintance to afford her the smallest satisfaction. She saw nobody in whose favour she could wish to overcome her own shyness and reserve. The men appeared to her all coarse, the women all pert, everybody underbred. God, I don't like that word. And she gave as little contentment as she received from introductions either too old or new acquaintance. She received from introductions either too old or new acquaintance. The young ladies who approached her at first with some respect in consideration of her coming from a baronet's family were soon offended by what they termed airs. For as she neither played on the pianoforte nor wrote fine pelisses? Shoot. I need to learn French. I think this is making me realize that I absolutely need to learn French. Everything's so far away, you know? In Europe, everything's just so close together, and you can just go to France and hear people speaking French all the time, or German, or Spanish, and here everybody speaks English.
Police.
No, you know what? I would love...
Police.
Police, a woman's cloak with armholes or sleeves, reaching to the ankles, a fur-lined cloak, especially as a part of a hussar's uniform. Whoa, it's Latin, then French. I'm certain it's not pronounced that way. Can we do a French pronunciation? Police. Okay. Oops. Wait.
Police.
Police. There we go. It's just the same except sounding French. Police. There was another word in here that I knew I didn't know, but I moved on so quickly. Okay. Some sort of fancy cloak. Where were we? Police airs. Okay. She neither played on the pianoforte nor wore fine police. They could, on no farther observation, admit no right of superiority. Okay, so she doesn't act like a higher class girl, so they're just treating her as they are. Which, this is so interesting. This is like human nature, because like Fanny now has the perception from her uncle. You know, she has this like looking down on these people. This is where she came from. This is so fascinating. The first solid consolation which Fanny received for the evils of home. Now home is evil. The first which her judgment could entirely approve, and which gave any promise of durability, was in a better knowledge of Susan, and a hope of being of service to her. Susan had always behaved pleasantly to herself, but the determined character of her general manners had astonished and alarmed her, and it was at least a fortnight before she began to understand a disposition so totally different from her own. Susan saw that much was wrong at home, and wanted to set it right. That a girl of 14, acting only on her own unassisted reason, should err in the method of reform was not wonderful, and Fanny soon became more disposed to admire the natural light of the mind, which could so early distinguish justly, than to censure severely the faults of conduct to which it led. Susan was only acting on the same truths and pursuing the same system, which her own judgment acknowledged, but which her more supine and yielding temper would have shrunk from asserting. Susan tried to be useful, where she could only have gone away and cried. Oh. And that Susan was useful, she could perceive that things, bad as they were, would have been worse for such interposition, and that both her mother and Betsy were restrained from some excesses of very offensive indulgence and vulgarity. In every argument with her mother, Susan had in point of reason the advantage, and never was there any maternal tenderness to buy her off. The blind fondness which was for ever producing evil around her she had never known. There was no gratitude for affection, past or present, to make her better bear with its excesses to the others. All this became gradually evident, and gradually placed Susan before her sister as an object of mingled compassion and respect. That her manner was wrong, however, at times very wrong, her measures often ill-chosen and ill-timed, and her looks and language very often indefensible, Fanny could not cease to feel, but she began to hope they might be rectified. Susan, she found, looked up to her and wished for her good opinion, and knew as anything like an office of authority was to Fanny, knew as it was to imagine herself capable of guiding or informing anyone. She did resolve to give occasional hints to Susan, and endeavour to exercise for her advantage the juster notions of what was due to everybody, and what would be wisest for herself, which her own more favoured education had fixed in her. Her influence, or at last the consciousness and use of it, originated in an act of kindness by Susan, which after many hesitations of delicacy, she at last worked herself up to. It had very early occurred to her that a small sum of money might perhaps restore peace for ever on the sore subject of the silver knife, canvassed as it now was continually, and the riches which she was in possession of herself. Her uncle had given her £10, a parting, made her as able as she was willing to be generous. That's incredible, £10, huh? But she was wholly unused to confer favours, except on the very poor, so unpractised in removing evils or bestowing kindnesses among her equals, and so fearful of appearing to elevate herself as a great lady at home, that it took some time to determine that it would not be unbecoming in her to make such a present. It was made, however, at last. A silver knife was brought for Betsy, and accepted with great delight, its newness giving it every advantage over the other that could be desired. Susan was established in full possession of her own, Betsy handsomely declaring that now she had got one so much prettier herself, she should never want that again, and no reproach seemed conveyed to the equally satisfied mother, which Fanny had almost feared to be impossible. This reminds me of the Citizen Kane and that stupid sled Rosebud. Was that his dying word? Was this like this sled called Rosebud? I'm sorry, spoiler alert. He just wants to go sledding. And this is like, this should be called, well, it's called Mansfield Park. That makes sense. It's like this knife, this silver knife has the power to keep peace in this family. The deed thoroughly answered. A source of domestic altercation was entirely done away, and it was the means of opening Susan's heart to her, giving her something more to love and be interested in. Susan showed that she had delicacy, pleased as she was to be mistress of property, which she had been struggling for at least 2 years. She had feared that her sister's judgment had been against her, and that a reproof was designed for her for having so struggled as to make the purchase necessary for the tranquillity of the house. Her temper was open. She acknowledged her fears, blamed herself for having contented so warmly, and from that hour Fanny, understanding the worth of her disposition and perceiving how fully she was inclined to seek her good opinion and refer to her judgment, began to feel again the blessing of affection, and to entertain the hope of being useful to a mind so much in need of help and so much deserving it. She gave advice too sound to be resisted by a good understanding, and given so mildly and considerately as not to irritate an imperfect temper, and she had the happiness of observing its good effects not unfrequently. More was not expected by one who, while seeing all the obligation and expediency of submission and forbearance, saw also with sympathetic acuteness of feeling all that must be hourly grating to a girl like Susan. Her greatest wonder on the subject soon became, not that Susan should have been provoked into disrespect and impatience against her better knowledge, but that so much better knowledge, so many good notions, should have been hers at all, and that, brought up in the midst of negligence and error, she should have formed such proper opinions of what ought to be, she, who had had no cousin Edmund to direct her thoughts or fix her principles. The intimacy thus begun between them was a material advantage to each. By sitting together upstairs, they avoided a great deal of the disturbance of the house. Fanny had peace, and Susan learned to think it no misfortune to be quietly employed. They sat without a fire, just like the East Room. But that was a privation familiar even to Fanny, and she suffered the less because it reminded by it of the East Room. Me and Jane Austen, I feel like, are in this flow state right now. I can, like, read her mind, but not in, like, a predictable way. This is amazing. She suffered the less because it reminded by of the East Room. Right. It was the only point of resemblance. In space, light, furniture, and prospect, there was nothing alike in the two apartments. She often heaved a sigh at the remembrance of all her books and boxes and various comforts there. I love my books and boxes. That would be a cute store name. Books and Boxes. Inspired by Jane Austen. You can have that one. But my Yelp review of Families of Origin, that is patent pending. By degree, the girls came to spend the chief of the morning upstairs, at first only in working and talking, but after a few days the remembrance of the said books grew so potent and stimulative that Fanny found it impossible not to try for books again. There were none in her father's house, but wealth is luxurious and daring, and some of hers found its way to a circulating library. She became a subscriber. She's subscribed. Like and subscribe Fanny's. She's from the future. She's back to the future. She went to the future and has learned stuff from our time and went back and wrote these books. I swear to you, she's a time traveler. She became a subscriber? I know that's not like an original thing, but wealth is luxurious and daring. I love that. She became she subscribed to this channel, and so should you. Amazed at being anything in propria persona. Anything in propria persona. Propria persona. I see why people don't like an American accent. I can see it. In propria, nope. There's a space. In propria persona, meaning in his or her own person. Many people find him both in his verse and in propria persona too loud and pushy.
In propria persona.
Oh, in propria persona. Oh, a persona. Yeah. I mean, American English is the least romantic sounding language, I've got to say. God, it's terrible. In propria persona. Amazed at being anything in propria persona, amazed at her own doings in every way, to be a renter, a chooser of books, me, and to be having anyone's improvement in view in her choice. But so it was, she's acting to Susan how Edmund was acting to her, and it feels good to give back. This is But so it was. Susan had read nothing, and Fanny longed to give her a share in her own first pleasures, an inspired taste for the biography and poetry which she delighted in herself. In this occupation she hoped, moreover, to bury some of the recollections of Mansfield, which were too apt to seize her mind in her fingers, if her fingers only were busy. Idle hands. And especially at this time, hoped it might be useful in diverting her thoughts from pursuing Edmund to London, whither, on the authority of her aunt's last letter, she knew he was gone. She had no doubt of what would ensue. The promised notification was hanging over her head. Oh, yes. He's going to propose to Miss Crawford, maybe, right? The postman's knock within the neighborhood was beginning to bring its daily terrors, and if reading could banish the idea for even half an hour, it was something gained. The daily terrors of her finding out that Edmund is engaged to Mary, I think, is what we're talking of. Wow, this is really juicing me up and grinding my gears in the best way. I'm so excited about this book, and I simply don't want it to end, actually. Jane is a Buddhist. She is literally from right now. She's talking about subscribing. I mean, I know that's not like we didn't invent that term, but just to have that, I can't wait to hear it. She's like, she's unsubscribed from that library. Wow, I'm razzle-dazzled by this book. And I do want to keep reading, but I'm going to keep these videos short and sweet for our own attention spans. So happy reading whatever you're reading, and ta-ta for now.